professionals of Reddit. What's the funniest way you've ever seen a lawyer or defendant blow a court case? Story 1. I represent school districts. One of my clients has a farm that is used to teach agricultural science to the students. The manager of the farm decides to brutally euthanize a ton of chickens in full view of a group of elementary school students. Sometimes farms have to euthanize chickens. That wasn't the problem. The problem was that he was whacking the chickens over the head with a hammer. And he had to each chicken like 5 to 6 times before they died, because he's apparently some kind of psychopath. The poor chickens were not dying. That didn't deter him. If one refused to die, he'd just toss the chicken on the ground and try again with another one. But the birds were all getting horrifically damaged, so they were flapping in circles on the ground, or walking with terrible, stuttering limps, or screaming. One of the kids recorded it, and Jesus Christ, it was awful to watch. So I recommended the school district fire him immediately because holy. He sued for gender discrimination. Story 2. My brother was on a jury back in the days of MySpace. A woman had been hit by a big rig during foggy weather. She was suing for a back injury. The last day of the trial, they asked her if she has a MySpace account and brought up her site for the jury to see. I think all profiles were open then. There's a picture of her dancing on the hood of a car, and right next to it is a text exchange of her saying that she shouldn't go out too much because her lawyer says that she has to look injured. Needless to say, she lost that case. Story 3. A funny historical one here. Marshal Ney is on trial for treason after Napoleon gets overthrown for the second time. His lawyer desperately tries to save the marshal's life with an unusual take on things. Due to a border change, Marshal Ney's hometown was, at the time of the trial, in Prussia. Therefore, argued the lawyer, Marshal Ney was not technically French and accordingly could not be guilty of treason. Marshal Ney disagreed and shouted out to the court, "I am French, and I will remain French." He was subsequently found guilty and sentenced to death. This also has a double whammy with last words. He asked for and was given permission to lead his own firing squad. His last words to them were, "Soldiers, when I give the command to fire, fire straight at my heart. Wait for the order. It will be my last to you. I protest against my condemnation. I have fought 100 battles for France and not one against her. Soldiers, fire. Talk about a way to die." Story 4. I once attended oral arguments for U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. It's pretty much the big time. I watched a lawyer argue that his client received what's known as ineffective assistance of counsel at the trial from which she was appealing. The attorney, however, was not doing a very good job during oral arguments. So, at one point, one of the judges on the panel leans forward and asks him, "Counselor, are you currently providing ineffective assistance of counsel?" Story 5. Not a legal professional, but I do have a good story on this topic. 15 or so years ago, my dad was the manager of a small hotel. One of the semi-regular customers was this big Samoan dude who booked in for a day at a time, always had a few visitors, and always paid in cash in a 1-to-1 conversion with American dollars. Highly unusual in Australia. Dad always said he was a great customer, very friendly with the staff, never gave anyone any problems, and always had a bit of a chat when he checked in. One day, a couple of detectives rocked up and asked to speak to my dad. They showed him a photo of the aforementioned customer and asked if he was currently staying in the hotel. Dad confirmed that he was, and in a matter of minutes, a small contingent of cops arrived, stormed the room, and escorted the guy away in handcuffs. Turns out the guy was a pretty major drug dealer and was wanted in a couple of states. Cut to the court date quite some time later. My dad is in the witness stand, and, for whatever reason, the defense is trying to make out like my dad didn't know the defendant and had never seen him before. Obviously, my dad insisted that he did, in fact, know the defendant, but that line persisted from the defense. As my dad left the witness box, he walked past the defendant and said, "Hi, Barry," to which Barry enthusiastically replied, "Hi, Jason, how are you?" While I'm sure this wasn't the only thing that counted against him in the case, it certainly can't have helped. He ended up getting quite a few years in jail. Names changed. OBVs. Story 6. My father is an attorney, and he always had a story for us when we'd ask him this question. He tells it way better than I do, but I'll give it a shot. Some dude was allegedly smashing a wall with a sledgehammer with others in order to break into a private property. The cops rolled up, and he's the only one to get caught. Fast forward a few months, and this guy's in court. Apparently, a cop says something about how the defendant was the only one caught, but there were 2 other men who fled on foot and couldn't be apprehended. My father's client's face lights up in an aha moment and immediately tells the judge, "Not true, there were 4 of us." I guess he thought if he could disprove someone that the said he'd be let go. Safe to say he was found guilty of vandalism. My father says the judge just kind of sighed and told my father it would be a good idea to keep his client quiet. Story 7. Defendant is apprehended for warrants and asks judge for bail. Tells judge he moved and was not served with the warrants. Some question as to his identity. Judge asks defendant where he was born. Def says, Puerto Rico. Defendant totally looks mestizo, not Puerto Rican at all. Judge asks, where in Puerto Rico? Defendant says, San Juan. Judge asks defendant, when were you last in San Juan? Defendant says, a couple of years ago. Judge asks defendant, how did you get there? Defendant replies, I went on the Amtrak. Judge would not grant bail. When you flunk geography, it's for a long time. Story 8. Lawyer was verbally running through the evidence against the guy he was defending, trying to claim there wasn't enough to even call a trial. All totally fine, except he said, I believe a more seasoned judge wouldn't have let this trial move forward. Not knowing that the judge he's speaking to gave the okay to move the trial to this court. He was immediately given a hard motion denied. Story 9. I was the respondent, not the lawyer, in a civil case where the county accused me of violating a rule that a house cannot have more than 2 parties in a month. The county's prime witness admitted, on the stand, that first, the rule was implemented specifically in response to a complaint against me. 2. The rule was not written in the county code. 3. The rule was not included in my warning letter nor in my citation. 4. The county had no expectation of ever applying this rule to any other resident in the future. The judge declared the rule null and void. Story 10. A defense lawyer was delivering her closing statement to the jury. In her final sentence, she said, Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I urge you to find my client guilty. There was a moment of silence and she then says, Not guilty. I meant to say not guilty. Story 11. I'm an attorney, and I heard about a hearing where there were several criminal defendants before the judge. The judge noticed a strong pot smell in the courtroom and asked if any of the defendants had pot on them. No one came forward, and the judge proceeded, but the odor became stronger and stronger. Finally, the judge demanded the perpetrator to come forward. Finally, one of them came forward and had several bags of weed on him. I'm not sure what the charges were before him that day, but I wouldn't want to have been his attorney. Story 12. I'm a bankruptcy paralegal. I used to work for a Chapter 13 trustee who told me this story. A debtor who had filed a Chapter 7 bankruptcy was going through the normal questions at his 341 meeting. This meeting is a hearing without a judge, where the trustee asks debtors simple questions regarding their situation and the paperwork they've filed. Creditors may also question the debtor, but other than the IRS, none ever show up. And when I was there, the IRS representative always fell asleep, and I'd have to wake her when one of the cases she was there for was called. For the most part, it takes no more than 5 minutes per case. The hearing basically exists for the debtor to affirm under oath that to the best of their knowledge, their paperwork is complete and accurate, and for the trustee to address any issues he has with the case before the case is confirmed and allowed to take its natural course. With few exceptions, an attorney has done all their paperwork for them and is with them, representing them at this hearing. It's all very straightforward and a non-event for the most part. One document that the debtors have to provide lists all their personal property. Another document they provide is used to protect their property. As in bankruptcy, you're still allowed to keep your stuff, your car, and your house, provided the value of these things is within certain limits or meets various criteria. Most people don't have to give up any property at all. However, in a Chapter 7, a trustee can seize any of your property that is not protected. This would be property that is worth more than the values that are allowed, or that is not protected by other factors, such as being exempt from seizure for various reasons provided by the law. The trustee can also seize property if it could be protected, but the debtor has failed to fill out the correct paperwork to create that protection. I'm oversimplifying, but that's the gist of it. But again, very few people lose anything at all. Anyway, in his paperwork, the debtor in this story failed to disclose one item in particular, and had also failed to include it in the paperwork that would have protected it. And that is why he was forced to remove the Rolex from his wrist and hand it over to the trustee right then and there. Story 13. Sovereign citizens always make for a good time. There was the guy getting a divorce from his wife of 25 years. His entire argument for why he shouldn't pay alimony to his wife, who stayed home taking care of their 8 kids, 3 of whom were still at home, is that since his wife would no longer do her marital duties, it wasn't a marriage. She wouldn't sleep with him because he was against trying to prevent more kids happening at all. Then referenced the Bible on top of it. The judge's face was priceless. Story 14. After argument from the assistant district attorney, the judge asked defense counsel why he should allow the defendant to remain on his own recognizance. Defense counsel looks up, obviously searching for any reason he can, because he knows his client is a dirtbag and this is what he comes up with. because his girlfriend lives in the apartment above mine and I'll hear her crying all night. Defendant remanded to jail. Story 15. I worked as a paralegal in a firm, specializing in land use litigation and real estate. Another paralegal's husband got a DWI, and as a favor to her, one of the partners offered to defend her husband in court. This is a small town with a landmark windmill in the center of town. Well, this paralegal's husband's, who we all called the missing link, DWI stemmed from him crashing his car into the windmill. Front page of the local paper, reporters at the arraignment, the whole 9 yards. So the law firm partner tells the missing link that when the judge asks him how many beers he had before his accident, he should tell her he had 3. He proceeds to stand in front of the judge and tell her he had 3 cases. The whole room started laughing, and he ended up getting jail time. Story 16. Not an exact fit for the answer, but I once worked at a company where we found out that a lawyer was trying to arrange a class action suit against us before it got off the ground. We found out because this lawyer attempted to email her client, but accidentally emailed us instead, with all the details of the class action. Story 17. I observed a case where the plaintiff attorney played Michael Jackson's Man in the Mirror as his closing argument to evoke an emotional response in the jury. He lost. Story 18. I was an expert engineer witness at a deposition defending a contractor who happened to be an engineer himself. Plaintiff claimed he was liable as an engineer as well as the contractor. Defense was he was the contractor, but that doesn't mean he was the engineer for the project just because he was one. After 6 hours of headache-inducing questioning, plaintiff's lawyer pulls out a letter from and certified by the contractor that simply stated, I am the engineer for the project. He sits back and basically has that look of, let's see what you gotta say now, MFer. Story 19. Obligatory. Not a lawyer, but I took a class on constitutional rights where we had to read decisions from my country's Supreme Court. There was this one where a woman was suing her employer, a company, because IT had found pics of the woman on the company's computer. IT gave the tip to HR, who proceeded to contact the company's legal department. Anyhow, the woman was fired and she sued because she claimed that by showing the pics to the lawyer, the company was going against her right to privacy. HR also threatened to release the pics to the other employees if the woman kept suing or something like that. In the end, the court decided that HR had to return the pics to the woman, and that was it. The funny thing was that the woman claimed that those pics weren't pics, even though she was naked and in suggestive poses. She claimed that she had arrived tired from work, passed out on her bed, and her little daughter took those pics. Story 20. Flashing his gun at the witness during a deposition. Story 21. A prominent female attorney didn't like the judge's ruling in a family law case. She asked him if he was from another planet. The judge said, I beg your pardon? She approached the bench, without permission, and very rudely repeated her question. Judge told her to apologize. She refused. The judge had her thrown in the lockup for contempt of court. Story 22. I was still in law school working for a solo practitioner part-time. We had this divorce where dude got caught cheating and his wife cleaned out the bank account, which was the only marital asset, to pay for her attorney's fees. There was absolutely no reason for her to pay that much for an attorney, and due to that, the attorney on the other side was inflaming her client to fight on every little issue to earn that retainer. Now, our dude was also stupid. He didn't pay the court-ordered temporary child support order, and due to that, he had to pay some of her attorney's fees. But after all that is dealt, we have a date to hear arguments on anything not agreed to. Our biggest point is, he'll pay the support order, but she owes him half the bank account amount. We get in front of the judge and she tried to argue that she used the money to pay for a new place and moving fees. Bullshit. We had the financial statement where wife stated she paid pretty much the whole amount as a retainer. Judge turns around, looks at the attorney in the face, and tells her that her signature is on the financial statement, meaning that either she lied on the statement or she is lying right now. Judge tells her to think very carefully about her next statement and that in her opinion wife needed to pay half the money back. Other attorney goes quiet, asks for a recess, and completely changes her resolution position. We basically had her by the E, because she knew if we wanted to, this could amount to a bar complaint, as she made a false statement to the tribunal. We got him back all his money and he got to claim his child for the next 5 years on his taxes. Honestly felt bad for the wife. She had no fucking clue how badly her attorney was fucking her over. This, among other things, is why I refused to practice family law. Story 23. My professor was a lawyer, has worked on both sides of the law, and says the funniest in court is when someone attempts to represent themselves. He said they never know what they're doing and usually blow it for themselves. Plus, counsel is a free right. Edit. I am referring mainly to constitutional law. Story 24. In courtroom, where all they do is restraining orders. Everyone gets there at one time any morning and sits in the chairs and judge calls the cases one by one. Dude purposely sits next to girl getting the restraining order against him and starts trying to hold her hand and she yells and asks for help and bro had to wait outside. When it was his turn, the judge was so mad he almost sent him to jail. Story 25. Not me, not a legal professional, but my brother's EMT instructor used to live in Chicago. This one's a 2-4. The instructor himself had had his license suspended for numerous traffic charges, including evading police, but forgot about his arraignment date until about an hour prior. So the guy hops on motorcycle and drives himself to the court. Remember this for later. The dude in the court right before him is a Hispanic guy. The judge reads off everything he's charged with, and then the conversation goes like this. Judge: Mr. Gonzalez, how do you plead? Gonzalez: No hablo inglés. Judge: Mr. Gonzalez, do you understand a word I'm saying? Gonzalez: No hablo inglés. Judge: Mr. Gonzalez, am I to understand that this whole time no one has bothered to get a translator for you? Gonzalez: No hablo inglés. Judge: Well, I guess if you can't understand what you're charged with, we'll have to drop all the charges. Gonzalez: Gracias, senor. Starts walking out. Judge: Get back in here. After him, the instructor goes up. Judge reads his charges and then asks him how he got to the court that day. Instructor: Oh, my brother gave me a ride. Judge: Is that right? Instructor: Yes, Your Honor. Judge: Looking at the bailiff, do you have that footage from parking deck 3? He then proceeds to play CCTV footage of him showing up on the exact same bike that he was using for all when he ran from the cops. His license remained suspended, and the judge told him he couldn't go anywhere near the bike during that time. There was even a cop standing next to it when he left. Story 26. NL. I was being questioned as a prospective juror in a personal injury case. 8 people had already been seated, and the plaintiff's attorney asked me the same question he had asked everyone else and gotten, "Yes, of course," as an answer. Do you feel that a person has a right to be compensated for his injuries? My answer, probably louder and slower than it needed to be, was, not if he got hurt because he did something stupid. I had poisoned the entire jury pool, including those already seated. They settled out of court in 10 minutes for an amount much smaller than they were asking for. Story 27. So this wasn't the defendant, but a plaintiff. I was on a jury for a civil trial. There were 2 co-plaintiffs suing one defendant. The first co-plaintiff was being represented by his father, who was an older guy and didn't seem to have much experience in court. For the first week of the trial, seemingly every other question was being objected to, usually because his questions weren't questions, or he was trying to elicit testimony that was hearsay. He basically pissed everyone off and presented a terrible case. The second co-plaintiff then gets on the stand, and it was clear that he was there very reluctantly. It gets to the defendant's lawyer turn, cross-examination, and the co-plaintiff blurts out that the only reason why he's there is because of a fiduciary duty to the other plaintiff. Then he gets asked if he feels the defendant owes him any money, and he just says no. It was 6 weeks of this stupid trial. It wasn't every day, and there was no trial during the week for Thanksgiving, but it was excruciating. And the jury ended up awarding no money to anyone. What a colossal waste of time. Story 28. Not a defendant, but there was this dude in the court I interned as, who went in with his friend but wore a shirt with the exact color as the ones in group trials. The bailiff mistook him for a convict and was asking him to sit down. Hell no, man. I'm just here to see my friend. I ain't got no case. He was the one who got caught. I got away. No, he didn't get away. Story 29. Not my case, but still a personal favorite. I was sitting in court waiting for my turn. Case going was a littering case. Officer said he saw the defendant throw the clear wrapper on a pack of gum out of his window. Guy decided to defend himself. Girlfriend takes the stand. Officer has already testified. Guy asks, "Did I throw a gum wrapper out the window?" She replies, "No, you did not," with this huge grin on her face. The defendant is now also grinning and goes, "What? Didn't I throw out the window?" To which she replies, "It was the plastic wrapper from your cigarettes." Guy rests his case right there. Literally thought he would get off because the officer couldn't properly identify the clear plastic that he admits to throwing out the window. Story 30. Defendant was willing to stay on probation conditioned on jail until a bed became available. Due to the circumstances of the defendant's age and minor violations, the judge was very open to the possibility. So this was argued out. In rebuttal to the defense lawyer's argument, the prosecutor said something the defendant didn't like. The defendant stood up, called us all racists, and said, "Send my fucking to prison." You know that scene where Jerry Maguire pleads with Rod to help me help you? It was 100x worse. Story 31. I used to be a police officer and spent a lot of time in court and saw a lot of things go really wrong for people, but the one that sticks out is a guy who was up for DUI. He started relating his side of the story and tells the judge he only had 2 bottles of wine. His lawyer is desperately trying to get him to stop talking, and he yelled at his own lawyer, "Don't interrupt me!" And the judge says, "I think you should take a moment to listen to your attorney." And then he told the judge, "Don't tell me what to do. I'm not a child." And the judge just smiled and leaned back and said, "By all means, continue." It went badly for him, unsurprisingly. Story 32. I saw the cops blow it once. A high school friend got a speeding ticket and he ended up in court questioning the cop. Asked where the cop was situated when he clocked him, sitting under an underpass. Would you say it was dangerous to speed in that situation? Yes, traffic was heavy. Do you remember me saying at the stop there was another vehicle same make, model, and clothes in color as mine? Yes. How can you be sure you pulled over the right one? Between clocking the vehicle and pulling it over, I never took my eyes off of it. At this point, my friend says, after the stop, if I had pulled quickly onto the highway from the shoulder without looking at traffic in the rightmost lane I was entering, would you say that was dangerous and something you might pull me over for again? The cop is like, yeah. If I saw you do that, it would be unsafe and I'd pull you over again and give you another ticket. Are you admitting that's what you did? My friend, are you testifying that you would never pull out onto traffic without checking the rightmost lane you were merging into? Cop, yes, I wouldn't do that. Friend, so it's safe to say that when you pulled out to chase me, you definitely did so safely? You already said the traffic was dense, so are you sure you didn't just fly out into traffic and possibly almost hit someone? Cop, smugly. No. I'm quite sure I didn't almost hit someone or pull out in a dangerous fashion. What does this have to do with anything? Friend, well, you said earlier that you never took your eyes off the vehicle you clocked. Now you're saying that you entered the roadway safely because you checked the lane you were merging into. Can you please explain how it is that you managed to keep your eyes on a speeding vehicle in dense traffic, retreating from you at a high rate of speed and looked in your side mirror and rear view or over your shoulder and merged safely? Cop, I mean, it's possible. He just kind of looked pleadingly at the DA at this point. Judge had had enough, reamed my friend but dismissed the ticket. Story 33. I spent 2 days in jail many moons ago. I ended up in the felony section. That was fun. Anyhow, I met some pretty interesting characters. One such gentleman, I can't remember his name. Let's call him Bob. There were about 4 of us in a cell and we're just shooting and discussing why everyone is in here. Bob is back in jail. He is borderline retarded. Before this current situation, he was facing 2 felonies for, I don't remember. His lawyer eventually convinces the court that he can't stand trial because he is not mentally competent. They eventually let him go. What's the first thing he decides to do once he gets out of jail? Try to steal the first car he sees. In front of the courthouse, which is adjacent to the jail. Didn't cross his mind that cops would be in and out of that area all the time. He was back in jail probably 20-30 minutes after he got out, after beating 2 felonies. Oof. Story 34. I wasn't the lawyer, but a paid expert witness. As our lawyer questioned the federal employee, environmental law case, our client jumped up from the table and screamed in his broken English, "That AI. She a fucking lies like a lay." Fines were paid, but we did win the case. Story 35. My grandfather was a big-time lawyer back in the day for an oil company. In one case, it was the federal government that blew the whole case. My grandpa showed up to court, and the first thing he said was that they didn't have jurisdiction. The judge was like, "I'm a federal circuit court judge, the highest judge around. How can this be out of my jurisdiction?" The oil in question was drilled in Texas, refined into gasoline in Texas, and sold in Texas gas stations. Since it never crossed state lines, interstate commerce never happened, so the federal government has no jurisdiction. The judge just said he was right and closed the case. Pissed off the guys from Washington. Story 36. INL. But when I was 20, I had already gotten a speeding ticket and had done my driver's ed class in an attempt to keep it off my record when I got another speeding ticket days before the 1-year period would end. A second ticket while on your probationary period causes a license to be revoked. I go to court by myself and the judge says, well, you're the unfortunate one. The prosecutor laughs and just offers the 8-hour extended course as punishment. Story 37. Saw a lawyer schedule a preliminary trial on a non-criminal court day. These days were reserved for family, traffic, etc. The lawyer insisted by not doing so, it was a violation of his client's right to a speedy trial. He was in custody at jail and needed to be transported about 2 hours out of town for this court case. The judge knew the lawyer would be late. He was always late. So when the inmate arrived to court on the scheduled non-criminal court day, the lawyer was, you guessed it, late. Once the defendant was in process to the courtroom, The judge immediately told the clerks to not call the lawyer's office, and he started looking at his watch. After about 10 minutes, the judge called it, and we out-processed the prisoner to the transport vehicle. By the time the prisoner was moving off the property, the lawyer pulled into the parking lot. There was a closed-door session between the judge and lawyer, to be a fly on the wall for that convo. Story 38. I went to court with a friend who was really nervous and just needed someone to sit with him. Drug court was very interesting. One girl was there with her mom who kept trying to speak for her. The judge would ask a question, the mom would answer. The judge would remind the mother that her daughter was 18 and could speak for herself. This mom would not listen and was the judge off. The mom even started getting an attitude with the judge and started saying, "She's a child, she's scared." The judge was like, "Ma'am, she's 18. She's not a child anymore." He finally threatened her with contempt of court, and that got her to be quiet. The girl ended up getting a slightly harsher punishment than the other people pleading youthful offender, and I defiantly think her mom helped with that. Instead of having drug tests once a month that are $50, she was put on color code. This seemed to make the mom mad who tried to say something again, but this time the daughter elbowed her. Story 39. Lawyer here. I do patent litigation. The best I've seen is the other side cover up, destroy evidence. The punishment for that is not only a court sanction, thousands of doll hairs, and the client immediately fires you. If it's bad enough, the court will instruct the jury to consider the destroyed evidence to be bad for the party who destroyed it. Story 40. When I was clerking for a judge, a defendant wrote to the judge trying to explain that the 2 bongs found on the floorboard of the car were actually his girlfriend's, but he was afraid to speak up earlier because she's on Section 8, and drugs are forbidden for Section 8 recipients. Mind you, he was on probation at the time the cops pulled him over, and it didn't matter who owned the bongs. He was still in violation of his probation for being in possession of drug paraphernalia. His attempt to get out from his charges not only screwed over his girlfriend, but it also showed that he knew of the bongs that were in her S-car. Story 41. Landlord didn't want to sue for eviction under her name because she was collecting rent in cash and not declaring it, while her building was in foreclosure. So she had her accountant, who apparently thought there is such thing as client-accountant privilege and that kind of thing, sue the tenants in his name. So this random accountant shows up at eviction court with the tenants. His name isn't attached to the building or the leases in any way, but he swears he can get the landlord on the phone to vouch that he's authorized to do this in her name. Judge dismissed the case with no prejudice. You can't borrow someone else's name to sue someone if you're trying to do illegal things under your own name, or at all for that matter. Story 42. It happened to a friend. He hired a lawyer to sue his university for charging a fee that he wasn't supposed to pay. He discovered, at the very hearing, that his lawyer sued the wrong university. Story 43. I remember being in child support court and saw a guy going in front of the judge for non-payment of child support with his world's greatest dad shirt on. Story 44. The accused was being sentenced after a common suggestion by both the Crown and defense attorneys. When it came to calculating the total amount of days to be purged according to each infraction, the defense attorney started arguing that the Crown had her numbers wrong and that the sentence was supposed to be 75 days longer than what was about to be agreed upon. The accused's jaw just dropped in disbelief. Story 45. I have a bunch, but my favorite is a group of LLC members who refuse to hire a lawyer for the company as required by the local rules. They keep getting their filings stricken. It's to the point where the judge doesn't even set a hearing anymore. They file whatever they file, I move to strike, and the court enters an order striking it. Story 46. I am a lawyer now, but this was when I was in law school, and we had to go watch actual court cases in the local district court. A guy is accused of destroying some stuff his neighbor owns. After a complicated plea by his lawyer about how some evidence is inadmissible, and therefore it cannot be proven the defendant is guilty, the judge delivers the verdict, agrees with the lawyers, and acquits him. The defendant gets up, walks towards the judge, as if to shake his hand and says, "Thank you, Your Honor. I'll never do it again." The prosecutor then quasi-jokingly says, "Appeal." Story 47. Not a lawyer, but once was observing court. Defendant is being asked by the judge if he understands a question, as he was not a native speaker. Defendant refuses to answer, instead claiming to plead the fifth. Judge explains you can't plead the fifth because that's only for sworn testimony, not if, say, the judge asks if you understand the question being asked. He continues to decline to speak. The judge is visibly upset at this point because defendant is just being his attorney whispers to him. They seem at odds. His attorney then explains to the judge that after this appearance he will no longer be able to represent the defendant. Edit. Autocorrect. Story 48. I had a client show up to court wearing the same dress she had on in the video, showing her damaging her ex's property. Bonus. I had another client who was sleeping on a couch when his roommate invited the cops in. He was under a blanket, so the cops asked him to stand up for their safety. Dumbass stood up and a baggie of meth fell out of his lap into the ground. He had no idea how it got there. I'm gonna share some advice for all you fine folks. You don't have to let the cops search your car or home. Seriously, tell them to pound sand. My crim defense prof had a doormat that said, "Come back with a warrant." If they threaten to get a warrant, be nice and tell them you'll wait. I love cops, but too often they violate your constitutional rights, and that needs to stop. Story 49. A girl who was about to completely get off with no more than an adult caution due to her going to Australia. Well, she decided that even this was not fair, as she shouldn't be getting any punishment. She was arrested for stealing her boyfriend's car, hitting 3 vehicles as no license, leaving the scene, arriving back to the house and threatening him with a knife before we had to bring her a gunpoint onto her stomach where, once arrested, she damaged a police vehicle and spat at the custody sergeant. The boyfriend refused to make a statement and said he was driving, and the custody sergeant decided to leave the whole spitting thing. When she got into the box, she took off her shoe and threw it in the direction of the judge. Naturally, the size of the courtroom and her not being LeBron meant that it didn't get far. Safe to say, after that, she ended up with some time having to be served inside and subsequently no Australia. Story 50. Defendants claim they got trapped in a linen closet during the 2008 World Series and therefore shouldn't be on hook for the parking tickets their car acquired. They were ordered to pay the original fine. Story 51. I was working for a barrister who turned up to a hearing and discovered that opposing counsel had secretly contacted the judge's chambers with a whole bunch of information about the case. That's a horrendous breach of professional ethics. One of the very, very basic rules of litigation is that you file stuff with both the judge and the other side, except in very special circumstances. My barrister just kind of shrugged his shoulders at the judge when asked if he knew about the information. The judge spent the rest of the hearing tearing the opposition apart. They lost an absolutely unlosable case.